Hello and welcome to Pod of the Gaps. Good to be with my good old pals Michael Otts and Andy Bannister, and myself am Aaron Edwards. I just did that so that my name could be said last and most memorable. How are you guys doing? Andy, I hear you've been up in the hills of late in Scotland.
I have. So I'm just back from a 2-day kind of hill walk and wild camp into the heart of the Scottish Cairngorms. I gather it's raining at your end of the country, but here we've got blazing sunshine. So I've come back sort of bitten by midges, sunburned, but very, very happy. I climbed 3 of the highest mountains in Britain, so on one ridge walk. So
that's amazing.
Very exciting, spectacular scenery, and it's just nice to get away. Actually, I just that's my I'm not a sort of team sport person, but I'm a kind of climbing and mountaineering type thing. That's my sport. So I just love to.
You're just not a team player. You're an individualist. You're sort of
Actually,
selfish.
I was with a friend kind of thing. So
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I'm always amazed whenever Andy has any time off, he's usually up a mountain. So that's where you'll find.
I wonder, he seems to be up a mountain very regularly. So
that's true. It's a lot
of doing Solas work on top of a mountain.
Exactly.
Hey, Solas are paying you well to go up all those mountains. You could actually, you've got a lot of biblical, precedents for that. You could say, trying to be a kind of new Moses, that kind of vibe.
That's exactly it. And I did, to get the glucose stuff back up, I did indeed actually climb a mountain and take a couple of tablets. So that, puts me in the same category as Moses, I guess.
Well, that's excellent. That would have been a great opportunity for us to, if you'd had a particular kind of tablet that we could have plugged here and gotten some kind of amazing endorsement on the show. We were just talking beforehand about our listener supporters who kind of give some money on Patreon, which is nice. And we were discussing whether we would have, some kind of bonus content that some of the kind of cool podcasts do that is only accessible to the Patreon subscribers. But we haven't really quite got there yet, have we? Any thoughts, Michael, what we could offer our Patreon listeners?
No, I mean, basically, you currently get all our contents. So unless you want a pre-podcast chat,
we have nothing else to offer. Yeah,
which particularly wouldn't really inspire much support. I would.
What about like Andy going up a mountain, like just a recording of Andy walking up a mountain? But would that be
Yeah.
Or we could get product placement, so listeners can't see the video, but over Aaron's right shoulder is a rather sort of
the sky is the limit. Well, yeah.
Fetching leather sofa, so we could find out what companies supply that, and we could have people pay to put products in the back corner, and we could turn this into a video podcast instead.
Perfect. All sorts of wonderful options.
I can genuinely bake them a sourdough loaf, but by the time they get it, it might.
So next time people are listening to the Coca-Cola Pod of the Gaps show, they might sort of sponsor they might notice Patagonia, the occasional brand thrown in there, and people could pay.
True.
They could pay for Microsoft, to whatever. There we go.
That's right. Yeah. So, I don't know how. Yeah, we were talking about how do we segue into our thing here. Well, yes. I guess we did have Andy juggling earlier, so we think maybe some of the content could be Andy's juggling skills. But you did mention your lack of joy in team sports, Andy, and that does feed in very nicely into our topic for today, which is: does God care about sport? Now, it's quite a topical topic at the moment, as all topics ought to be, because we're in the middle of a rather major football tournament. Now, I won't say which one, just in case this dates the episode. Listeners listening in 7 or 8 years' time who are still trawling through the Pod of the Gaps episodes when we've become, mega superstars, and they want to say, right, what were they like when they only had a few listeners back in the early days, a few hundred listeners. This is where you'll be. But anyway, we've got this major football tournament happening, so it's kind of a festival, carnival atmosphere, and it's interesting the extent to which lots of Christians will be watching a lot of sport and thinking about it a lot. We've also got the Olympics coming up this same summer, and we have a rather large match happening even today. Is that dating it far too much? But I think it probably is worth mentioning, Andy, given that you're up in Scotland and me and Mike are down in England.
Exactly. So England are playing Scotland today at football or soccer for our American listeners. Of course, I am an Englishman living in Scotland, so it's very interesting. Who should one support in that scenario? So my next door neighbours have a kind of massive Scotland flag hanging from the window. We are not a flag waving country. Quite frankly, I couldn't care. Actually, it's not a game I'm particularly interested in, but it is interesting. The sort of rivalry comes out, because of course there's a lot of Scotland-England rivalry politically, and of course right now it's being channeled through what, in my view, is basically a children's playground game, but obviously there's lots of money.
Get back to your mountain. Get back to your mountain.
Yeah, I'm just laughing because we talk about dating it, but of course people might now think that we started recording this podcast in 1996, which would have been really ahead of the game.
That's right.
That was the last time that England played Scotland in a major tournament, which was very, very memorable, in fact, because of Gazza's goal after the Gaza incident in the nightclub and all of the rest of it. So, yeah.
One of the most amazing moments ever in sport was Gascoigne's goal against Scotland. It has to be. That would be quite an interesting podcast, by the way. Let's think of that as our side podcast. A kind of fake, like setting your podcast in the past. Like kind of like, I wonder what's going to happen tonight, whatever. And then sort of almost like a kind of retro podcast. That'd be quite amusing.
Not Pod of the Gaps, but Pod of the Past.
Pod of the Past. Pod of the Past. Yeah. That's going to be. That's what our Patreon listeners can get. You see, we will do an alternative 30-year-old version.
This is great because at the moment, there's lots of podcasts discussing what's happening now, but there's no podcast discussing the Queen's coronation. We should do it. Yeah.
Niche topics. How will this election vote go? That'd be amazing. Anyway, but nonetheless, this is a really important issue because it's clearly the case that in the modern world, especially, some have made the argument, especially as the world has become more secular, but maybe that argument is up for debate. We have gravitated more towards our love and obsession with sport as a culture. Western culture spends a lot of time and a lot of money following lots of different kinds of sports. Football is certainly the major one internationally, but there's so many other sports which are really, really significant. And what does God think about all this? If you're a Christian, is he going, isn't that awesome? Just keep spending all of your time and money or significant swathes of it on these things that some people like Andy might think are a complete waste of time. So why don't you just kick us off, Michael? What's your kind of initial reflections on what the value of sport is?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I was thinking just on what you were saying there in terms of different reactions to sport. There are some Christian friends that I know very well who are just very scathing, how dare you spend the evening watching football? You should be out doing evangelism. And almost judgmental about people who kind of get passionate about sports. I guess flip to the other extreme. I remember being quite challenged when I was about 18. I think it was another major football tournament when I suddenly realised actually my passion and enthusiasm for football was actually far greater than my passion and enthusiasm for God. And I thought, actually, isn't it interesting here in church? We were watching a football game after church, and basically everyone was getting really, really into it and jumping up and down on the tables and cheering. I thought, in the worship time in church, 2 hours before, we'd all been standing there in very monochromatic kind of emotional kind of Britishness. And I just thought, isn't that interesting? Surely, it's not wrong to get excited about football, but if we really genuinely believe the gospel, perhaps that should also connect with our emotions too. So yeah, I think there are different extremes in terms of how we can go to it. But actually, I think we want to say as Christians, there is a really positive role that sport can play in society. It's interesting, actually, just thinking on this. I'm now in Leicester, come back to Leicester, and I was chatting to a few friends recently saying actually there's a real, there's often, although Leicester is very ethnically diverse, there hasn't been the kind of ethnic tensions in Leicester that there have been in some cities in different parts of the UK. And there is a real sense of togetherness and pride in the city. Yeah. And I was asking someone, well, why is this? What is it that kind of draws us together? And for a lot of people, actually, they said it's sports. Because football, rugby, to a lesser extent cricket, Leicester has been famous as a sporting city, and actually that sense that we can take pride together, and there is a way in which sport does unite people, bring people together. I remember going to the Rugby World Cup last year, 2 years ago rather, and it was amazing to go to Japan and be there for a few days, and just this sense in which suddenly people could talk to each other, this chatting to people from other countries. It was wonderful. So there's a really positive thing that sport can do. That's just one of the aspects of it.
That's really good. It's really interesting you say that. I have a memory of doing, you talk about the mission guilt element of sport. I once managed to do the most amazing mission trip ever, which I did for a couple of years, or as in short-term mission trips, but over a couple of years, in Albania, where it was a football mission trip. So we got a load of guys who play football to go over and play kind of some local semi-pro teams in Albania. That was your evening kind of slot, and then the morning slot was like 4 hours of coaching. Sort of, I think it was like 8 to 12-year-olds in football, but they would arrive hanging out of the minibus at like 8 a.m. desperate and screaming, so excited, and we couldn't speak a word of Albanian. Obviously, we tried to learn a bit, but Albanian is an unbelievably difficult language with Q's and K's and J's just thrown in casually around random words. And so literally we'd only be able to communicate through football almost the entire time. And the kids would come wearing the same football shirt every day for the whole kind of 10 or 12 days. And you just talked, you'd almost call them the name that was on the back of their shirt. If it was Kaka, or I remember one kid there's an obscure, now obscure Arsenal player called Sylvan Wiltord, who was, I remember one, and we just, like, Wiltord, how are you doing? Whatever, or Kaka, come over here. And it's just interesting how that became an international language. And the love of this game did unite people. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it can't become idolatrous, though, can it? But it is one of those things, as you say, it unites people. It can give people a sort of connection humanly. They can have a lovely time doing it. But as you say, there's that weird connection where we care more about it often than we would about God. So Christians who would say, "Oh, I'm British. That's why I don't act like a kind of Pentecostal West African when I worship. I just sort of we're more reserved." But clearly, you go and you look at the flags that will be out today, and the kind of, if I go down to the local pub this evening and watch hopefully England trounce Scotland, I'm going to hear the kind of shouts which go beyond, "Oh, we're just British. We never really express ourselves." So you're so right that does really put the finger on this issue of idolatry, doesn't it? Andy, anything to throw in as a non-football fan to kind of observe here?
Well, yes, it is interesting listening to the two of you talk, and I think, yes, as I think I commented backstage, you could take the amount I'm interested in football, you could put it into a matchbox, and there would still be room left over for the matches. And that said, I'm not anti-football. That's interesting. We're very careful here. I'm not anti-football or anti-team sport. It's just never been a thing for me. It's just never connected. It's never resonated. All the kind of, as a kid, the kind of sports I was into were the rock climbing, the mountaineering, canoeing, kayaking. I love doing those with other people. I'm not like, I don't want to go and just on my own. But I've never felt the need to, hey, let's join up with 11 people and kick a leather balloon around a bit of mud. It's just never sort of worked in that way. What I do think is interesting, and it ties into what you were saying there, is that, for all the talk that we live in, increasingly secular societies here in the West, we live in cultures of transferred religious commitments. So I think people have taken, what would traditionally have been, sort of ways through which one express your religious identity and your worship of God, and those are simply transferred across onto other things. So that I do know people from the football is almost their religion. They are utterly devastated if their team lose, if their team win. They're flying for a week. Although that said, and this isn't a joke original to me, I forget who first said this. I do like the way that sometimes football fans do talk about their team as if they were on the pitch. They'll say, I've got friends will say things like, "Oh yeah, we whoever we are, that team, we really beat Arsenal last night." And I'm like, well, no, you didn't. You sat on the couch with pizza and a Coke, and you watched somebody else beat Arsenal. That would be rather like me, sitting watching Lord of the Rings, going, "Man, we really defeated those orcs last night, didn't we?" But I think that various way that we project ourselves into the the religious components I find interesting. The fact that it bonds people together. You mentioned the celebration and the being very expressive. That other parts of the culture doesn't come out. The tribalism, that's a negative word, but the kind of community bringing people together, and the sense of needing to belong to something bigger as well, I think is interesting. So there's so many components that are there in sport that I find fascinating.
But I think that was really interesting you mentioned that, Andy, because there is that sense of like you being united to your team, so like I often used to say, like, I should say I have 3 football teams I support. Leicester, because I grew up there and now have moved back here. Southampton, because that was a team that was supported by a friend of mine for a long time, and I met him when I was a teenager. And then Bournemouth, because I lived there for about 17 years. But anyway, I could say as a Southampton fan, in 1976 we won the FA Cup. But I didn't even exist in 1976. Yet it's a legitimately kind of thing you can say as a fan. And I think it's Glenn Scrivener, the evangelist, who says actually that does tap into something very profound about the gospel, in that actually our union with Christ means that what Christ has done, he has done on behalf of us, and we can say that we died in Christ, were raised with Christ, and so on. And so, like, it just struck me that when we talk about this doctrine of union with Christ, it does sound very alien, and yet the concept is something that any sports fan totally gets. Because yes, that team on the pitch is doing it all. You did absolutely nothing other than sit on the couch and eat pizza, and yet you share in their victory, and you can have genuine joy because they won, or genuine sadness because they lost. But there is something in that. It's we have a champion who fights our battles, and we're connected to him. I probably should have saved that to the end because that was the great gospel Jesus.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed the episode of Part of the Gap. Join us in 1976 when Michael will be telling you all about the upcoming Southampton FA Cup final. That's really helpful reflection there, Michael, and we can actually pick some of that up later. I think how we connect, whether or not it's either it's a complete waste of time, like following these sports in the detail that we follow them, or there are ways in which you can connect elements to the gospel, and you've got to find that kind of, that not necessarily always a happy medium, because that can almost be a very vanilla way of looking at everything. And I get a bit sick of the fact that a lot of public evangelical responses are just, there's a crazy on my left, there's a crazy on my right, and I'm the perfect one in the middle who doesn't really care that much about anything. It's kind of like, I think it's a little bit more of a tension, as G.K. Chesterton says often. You're more like you're not in a balance, you're actually in a kind of carriage ride, trying to avoid the pits on the left and right, but you're moving. You're kind of in tension sometimes. You're not actually just flatly balanced in a kind of vanilla way. But there's something about the stuff you're talking about culture, isn't there? About secular culture maybe, which is replacing religion. In the way in which we follow it. I think that's something to bear in mind as well as Christians, as we witness and seek to see this missionally. I was always really struck whenever I teach philosophy. I noticed that a lot of the postmodern and existentialist philosophers of the 20th century, the people who are sort of trying to think about what on earth, how does life make sense now we've gotten rid of God. Now we've taken Nietzsche's advice and said that God is dead, and we think religion is a waste of time, or indeed is coercive and manipulative and destroyed lots of lives, stopped science, all these silly myths that come out. What do we do now? How do we actually make sense of what life means? And sport gives you a vicarious sense of the meaning of life when life doesn't actually seem to be very meaningful, because you don't have an author of the universe, you don't have a kind of connection to your creator and your redeemer, and so therefore you give yourselves to these heroes, these godlike figures, and of course many of them have been called gods. One of my favourite footballers growing up was Robbie Fowler, Liverpool player, whose nickname literally was God. And I can remember doing a kind of tongue-in-cheek essay for a theology degree once with a very liberal teacher, who was really a big fan of all these sort of multiple religions, a religious experience wherever anyone feels something transcendent in any capacity, whether it's a gig or whether it's a sporting event, whatever, that's kind of valid religious experience. So I just wrote an essay about the verification of Robbie Fowler as an actual deity, and I ended up getting a distinction for the essay, though I wrote it almost as a mockery of the whole thing. But I used the concepts that they validated religion by, and it worked, kind of thing. So you can actually prove anything, it seems, in academia. But anyway, it does speak to the fact that these philosophers, they think about the meaninglessness of life. They literally, that's part of their philosophy. Thinking of people like Albert Camus or Jacques Derrida. And they were actually really interested in football, specifically, but they liked all sports. But they loved the fact that sport was a controlled, ordered system of meaning. And I think there's a quote from Derrida, I think, which is, everything I've learned about philosophy, I learned from football, which is an unbelievable thing to say. But I can see how it makes sense, because you've got a closed system. Everything makes sense. There's an author, there's rules, there's regulations, everything that's the opposite almost of how they think the world is. They don't think there's rules. They think that everything deconstructs. Everything is a made-up system that we've just invented to give ourselves, a reason to not kill ourselves in a way. And so therefore, they still enjoy sport, even though they know it's almost like it becomes a replacement, doesn't it, for meaning itself.
And I think just on that, talk about idolatry for a second, just to say, it's very easy, people say, is football idolatrous or not? And we talked about people who say yes it is, and other people say no, it's really good. But the whole point of idolatry is that the things that we're most tempted to idolize are good things, right? I'm much more tempted to idolize something that is legitimate, like a good gift, than something that's quite obviously harmful and bad. So the fact that something can be idolized doesn't mean the thing itself is bad. Like, that's the point, isn't it? They're good gifts that become, God replacements. So there is an inherent goodness to sport, but yes, there is a danger. Like anything else, it can be idolized. In a sense, things that are better, I'm less likely to idolize Haribo, because whilst I like Haribo, like, they're not big. But things that are really, really good, the better something is, the more I'm likely to idolize it. A bit like sex, we as a culture attempts to idolize sex, not because sex is bad, but because actually it is profoundly good and one of God's greatest gifts. And so in a sense, because we attempt to idolize sport, is because sport is a really good gift to us legitimately. In a culture that's moved on from God himself, we look for God replacements. We're worshipping beings. We can't get away from that. We just find substitutes.
And there's even something, so I'll let you jump in, Andy, in a second. There's even something just off the back of that, Michael, about how we're made as creatures. So the fact that an animal cannot create a system of meaning and care about it. So even the fact that Andy could laugh at the fact that it is, like many people have said, it's just a bunch of leather being kicked around on some mud. That is literally what it is. But actually, it isn't what it is. It's more than that, because of the meaning we've ascribed to it. And the meaning we've ascribed to it is it's not meaningless, actually. It tells you something about the kind of God. God created a world like that. He cares about law and order, statistics, good and bad. He cares about things that are recognizably quality and not quality, this kind of thing. You think of the Paul in Philippians 4, whatever is noble, whatever is good and lovely and perfect. You think about these things. You could apply that to sport, but also as a way of saying we are created beings. We're in his image. Of course, we're going to go and create these systems of meaning, even if we overdo it and idolize them. There's something about the imprint of God in us caring about stats like this. It's almost like, I don't know if you had this at university. My housemates, we created endless games out of nothing that were just ludicrous. Like we had this, I remember creating a game called Power Play. And it was so specific to the lounge that we had in that particular year at university, but we got so into it. There were so many ridiculous rules, with ridiculous sort of titles. Someone had left there was a laundry basket in the corner. It was this kind of like kind of soft football, batting it over. There were so many touches you could have, and it was a really elaborate point system. And then every now and then you could go for the golden chalice, which was the laundry basket in the corner. So if someone didn't defend the chalice, he's gone for the chalice. And it was like, it became so meaningful. And I was like, we've literally invented something out of nothing. But in a way that's something about how God creates the universe. He's given us that sub-creativity, as Tolkien would use the phrase, not actually creativity. Sorry, Andy, jump in.
Yeah, sorry. I was going to jump in again.
The game making is funny though, because I had a friend years ago who a little game he would play down the pub, because it works best if you're at a large table and you need 2 or 3 of you in on it, or 2 of you in on it. And what you do is you start, 2 of you start moving the items on the table, the salt and the pepper and the cutlery around as you're playing a game, a bit like chess. And the idea that what you want to try and do is convince other people around the table there are rules to this game, and that you've succeeded when somebody else chips in to go, I think you should do that move, mate. And it's had quite good success at convincing people this was like pub chess. I just find that quite funny. But 2 things that are there that interest me, Aaron. One is your point about animals is interesting, isn't it? Because I'm fascinated about in all the ways that as human beings we are demonstrably so much more than the animal kingdom around us. Sure, we're connected to it, but there's also something uniquely human. And sport is a good example, right? You don't get squirrels organising themselves into teams and playing football with acorns, or even animals that are very social, like sheep will gather together in herds, but they don't go, hey, why don't we organise 5-a-side? I mean, it's not that animals don't play. Certain animals do. Crows, otters, other creatures are known to engage in playing behaviour, but not this sort of team-based thing, which I think is fascinating. So again, I think it's something about the image of God coming through there, or the very least human uniqueness, which I think is I think if I were an atheist, that would be trouble. But human uniqueness is a bit like the bubble under the wallpaper that you desperately try and push it down here and it just pops up. But then the other side to it, I think, is that your comment about idols is interesting, because I agree, idolatry takes something good and makes it central. But also the other thing idolatry will often do is there's always that dark side and plus side to things too when they've got caught up in that. And I think sports like this, right? I think there's so much that is good in sport. Even as a non sort of sport watcher, I'm still like, I can see there's lots of good stuff in it. But then there's also the negative. There's the tribalism. there is the sort of it becoming an all-consuming piece. But the other thing interesting is the kind of bread and circuses thing too, because this idea that the way the Roman Empire kept the peasants from revolting was toss them bread and give them the gladiatorial games, and you're distracted. And I do think something similar goes on today. Actually, there's a great game that's played. Is we must never let the masses actually figure out that the elites think there is no God and everything is the will to power, because it will just destroy civilizations. So bread and circuses, which in our age is probably, I don't know, Netflix and sport and whatever, because it keeps people from thinking about the bigger questions. And I hadn't that Derrida quote was a new one to me. I've read some of his stuff, I hadn't come across that, which I think is fascinating. That even an ardent postmodernist like Jacques Derrida, is still drawn to that order and structure, because I think as human beings we can't avoid it. And it's one thing to say that everything is just meaningless and everything's just language games and whatnot, but you can't live like that. So as you were suggesting, he found his little retreat, his little safety hole, being a game where there were rules and there was structure. That's fascinating, because of course the Christian message is actually the little game and the big game, as it were, do actually connect.
And it's interesting that that's even, I mean, it may even, maybe someone could fact check that. It may be either Camus or Derrida who said that, either that or they said that it was one of them who said as well, that it's about that system of meaning, within the system of rules, and that's why it was so fascinating to them. But it's so interesting how pervasive, as I said, that same thing is across all of those weird thinkers. Samuel Beckett was another one, kind of more of a playwright, but an absurdist kind of in this meaninglessness of life philosophy, kind of subscribing to. But he was obsessed with things like chess. In fact, wrote a whole play called Endgame about the concept of chess as an analogy for the universe and meaning, but the kind of search for it. They love meaning. They love systems and structures of meaning. They can't get away from that. They can't just say, I think these are rubbish, I don't like sport. It's just amazing to see those connections. But as you say, Andy, it's so important for us to challenge that as well, because it's clearly the case that sport has always been massively successful and popular, but it seems to have just ramped up in the level of statistics. My wife is just amazed. If I'm watching a match on BT Sport, and I might have watched Liverpool play, and then there'll be an advert for another game coming up on Wednesday, and then we've got this tomorrow, then we've got this the day after, and this is just for football. Imagine if you had time to kind of devote to 3 or 4 sports that you were watching. There are guys who do that, who have Sky Sports, the kind of cable channel in the UK, and will watch endless amounts of sport, seemingly, because there's just an endless amount of drama that can be created. And so we can talk about the systems of meaning being a good thing, but clearly we have to address the fact that this is a weird, almost the symptoms of a sick society as well, because they're not thinking about transcendent universal meaning. We can ascribe meaning to it as Christians, but we need to make those connections, and we need to proclaim the word of God in the midst of that, rather, so we don't condemn it and say, oh, it's all terrible and of the devil. We can say, look, this is really good. And yet there's got to be stuff where we challenge the depth with which people kind of completely distract themselves from the big questions with these systems of meaning.
I think you're right. And as you say, that reminds me, and we've talked about, I think we may have talked about him on this show before, but Dan Strange, who's a theologian and known to some as a friend of mine, wrote a wonderful little book a couple of years ago now called Plugged In: How to Connect Your Faith to What You Read, Watch and Play. And he has this model of what he calls subversive fulfillment that I think is quite clever. What's interesting is actually he uses football as one of the work examples. He says, look, when as Christians we come across any cultural product, be it a book or a movie or a phenomenon or a sport, the first thing you can do is enter, so you can sort of step into that world, understand how it works. You can enjoy football, but sort of figure out what's going on before we pronounce. Then you can begin exploring and ask the bigger questions. What is this? What's this tapping into? We've done this with football today, right? We've talked about the tribalism, the community, the sense of belonging, the hope and despair that's there in football. Those are all theological themes that you begin to discover. And then the next step is third step. After you've entered and explored, then he said, what Dan says, there's then the task comes to expose, and that's where you show, look, this thing is not living up to the dreams that are claimed for it. In the case of football, you can't build your identity there. You can't build your entire sense of community there because that's going to lead to tribalism and whatnot. So show where it doesn't meet what's being asked of it. But then the fourth E, because all these begin with E, so you enter, explore, expose, then you evangelize and show how actually this thing that's being looked for here is actually answered in the gospel. And he takes that entire model out of Scripture, out of Acts 17. That's what Paul does with the altar of the unknown gods. He enters the culture, explores the city. He's quite positive about the Athenians' religiosity, but then he critiques and sort of shows how actually this idea can't, really meet our, that isn't actually true ultimately. And then as you read on in that sermon, then connects it to the gospel. But it's a very clever model because it enables you to look for the good and affirm the good, but not just make random critiques, but then connect those critiques to what the thing is trying to do, and then point it to the gospel. And
it's interesting. It's interesting then to ask the question, what is it that sport's tapping into in our humanness? We can see it, for instance, we can see in sex and relationships why we would idolize those things, because it's that desire for intimacy, for belonging. We might see in making a career your identity like an idolatry, because we all need to have a foundation to life and a sense of self-worth. I wonder with sport, is it that sense? It's more than just something to do, isn't it? It's that sense that you're looking for, particularly as a fan, that sense of euphoria and being lost communally with other people in something beyond yourself. I often talk to people about the greatest moment of my sporting life was watching sport. It was when England won the Rugby World Cup, because I'm more of a rugby person than football. But I still remember that sense of incredible euphoria when Johnny Wilkinson dropped the goal in 2003 and we won. It was early in the morning. It was just incredible. But because it was early in the morning, I remember like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, walking through town, just thinking like this amazing sense of anticlimax, which was like, that's the greatest thing that I could ever hope to watch as a rugby fan. But what now? Like, I've got to go and find lunch. And that's the thing about sport, is it taps into this desire. And yet when you get the very thing that you really want, you realize that it's just an echo of something else that you must really want. And of course, you look at Revelation and you think about those visions in Revelation of this great multitude that no one can count before the throne, worshipping the Lamb. Like, surely that idea of a great multitude worshipping their sports team is a tapping into that, that ultimate reality that we'll one day look forward to. And maybe we need to think about that. I don't know.
That's a really good point. I think that's a fascinating thing to connect that to Revelation. And I think there's a sociologist called Emil Durkheim who referred to the effervescence of the crowd. So when you are in a crowd, there's an effervescent effect. Now that could be negative, because it could mean you just go along with whatever the crowd, the mob would say. But there's also a positive effect in the sense that you're joined together with them. And surely there's something about how church is imagined and designed by God. The fact that we're called to not, don't give up meeting together and join together, sing to one another with psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, sing to one another. It's interesting. Sometimes we just go into church and just close our eyes and just sing directly to God. Clearly it's worship to God, but there's an element of the necessity of the congregational, and that's something about that clearly that's related to sport. It wouldn't be the case that you wouldn't be as interested in sport if you were the only fan in the world. Equally, if you were the only fan of Pod of the Caps in the world, you'd feel a bit odd as the one person being spoken to. Thankfully, we have a few more than that. But the interesting thing about that is it also taps into, as you say, Michael, there's something good there. And Andy mentioned as well with the Dan Strange, the plugged in stuff. There's a really good thing here, which we have to say before we're going to critique it. Or maybe depends which order you do it, because Paul obviously is provoked and distressed by the idols, and then he's able to bring something positive. So it depends which order you do that in. But I was interested to think of a famous quote from Bill Shankly, who's Liverpool's great manager back in the 60s. He was once asked, famously, some people are saying this match coming up, this big match coming up, is a matter of life and death. And he said, in his normal kind of dry Scottish accent, "Oh no, it's far more important than that." And so there's loads of quotes. The football is more important to people than life and death. And he's sort of tongue in cheek, but he's also, I think, tapping into something that it has to matter massively or not at all. So there's a sense in which you either are really, really excited about this, or if you're kind of on the fence, going, well, it doesn't really matter. Well, if it doesn't matter, if you're like Andy in your view of football, just don't even care at all. Like, go away. You either really care about this or you don't. Otherwise, you'll kind of have a kind of foot in both camps. Because either it's completely meaningless, or you're going to be like, well, I'm going to really embrace this as a meaningful activity. And then that's why I think it's important for Christians to think about this theologically as well. So not just to think guiltily about the amount of sport you consume. Now, be discerning and prayerful about that, but actually also, thinking about how you can understand this as a genuinely worshipful thing or missional thing, or maybe you should cut yourself off from it as well if you can't do that. Because otherwise, it does become one of those things that genuinely can become idolatrous if you're just unthinkingly immersing yourself. If I might, I'll just say one more example of that, and I'll let one of you jump in if you want. So I had a weird experience as a massive Liverpool fan. In the beginning of the 2018-19 season, I can remember we were on holiday as a family in the Isle of Wight, and I was desperate to find a venue as soon as we got to the house we were staying in, to find a place where I could watch the first Liverpool match of the season, which was actually against Dan Strange's beloved West Ham. If Dan's listening, I don't know if he does listen, but we'll make sure he listens to this one. And I remember thinking, whatever I'm doing, I need to make sure I get to the game for it. And I felt like it almost a desire that was becoming quite inappropriate. Like I was sort of, how quickly can I get everyone unpacked and stuff ready? I just need to get there. I didn't manage to do it in time. I thought, I'll wait for the kind of highlights in the evening. Then there's some problem with the Wi-Fi. I'll have to wait till tomorrow and catch it on iPlayer. And then it's just transpired I couldn't watch it. And I remember I was listening to an audio recording of Oswald Chambers at the time, and I was just really struck by his life and his approach to life, and just thinking, gosh, it really is inappropriate to have this kind of desire where I need to watch this. So I'm so excited that I desperately need it, and it's become, genuinely an idol. So I really felt God speaking to me to say, I think you need to step back from this for this season. So the whole of that season, I didn't follow football at all. I still played football, and for my team and stuff, but I didn't follow. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't watch anything online. Obviously didn't watch any, and I didn't know how Liverpool were doing. It was so amusing to many of my friends who knew Liverpool were having a pretty amazing season that year. They ended up winning the Champions League and almost winning the league.
What a year to opt out of football!
I know, it was unbelievable, and so it was a weird thing. But then, at the end of it, I felt it was such a kind of, I don't want to say cleansing experience, because that could sound almost kind of Roman Catholic in my penance always, but it was a sense in which I was able to step back. And because of that, not only did I save a heck of a lot of time, goodness me, you realize how much time just checking transfer gossip and watching this or that. But when I then watched football the following season, when Liverpool actually won the league, so clearly that's why God was doing it. He saved me from the, he did it all for my benefit to save us almost winning the league, the heartache. Anyway, I'm following it the following year, and I find for the first time probably, I'm able to genuinely worship God in and through my love of the game. And so Liverpool then had an amazing season, and I was thanking God consciously all the way through for football. I don't think I'd ever done that. I think I'd thanked God for the playing, because I think you're more personally involved maybe, but I hadn't thanked him so much ever for watching football. I think it was almost like an escape or a distraction from other stuff, like ministry stuff or mission stuff, whatever your life's doing. I'm going to watch a game. But actually it became a thing where I was like, wow, this is so amazing, because I'd had this personal encounter with God in having to give it up. Then I was able to embrace it properly, and I felt like I was released from the grip of idolatry. So that was an interesting thing to have happened, really.
And just interesting on that, I think often the way to guard against idolatry is gratitude, isn't it? Because it's very hard to idolize something whilst also thanking God for it. And it's an incredibly positive thing to do, but to be able to, what do we do? We acknowledge him as the source of all good gifts. And in a way that enables us to enjoy it more, like you say. But it takes some of the pressure off. And because I think the danger is, and I know this in my own heart, if we idolize sports, then we'll always be disappointed. Even when we win, there'll be that sense that, but what next? But when we lose, it can be absolutely crushing, because there's nothing else to go to. I think absolutely, like if if you know God, doesn't mean I don't. I still get very excited when we win, and I still get a bit depressed when we lose. But actually, we know that those things point to greater realities, and we can hold on to that.
I'm sure it's similar for Andy as well with the World Canoeing Championships and things like that.
World Canoeing Championships or whatever. But,
or the pub test tournaments with the salt pepper.
Yes, exactly. That really should definitely be a thing. No, I think you're right. And I was just reflecting on the fact. I think that in essence is the nature of an idol, isn't it? It just promises that which it can't deliver. And ironically, whether it fails to deliver it or if it does deliver it temporarily, you still end up ultimately disappointed. And I think that's that's I think the inherent into the nature of idolatry. And of course, the other thing we haven't talked about is that the idol doesn't just damage you; often damages those around you. And I think I've seen relationships suffer when perhaps some of the husband, particularly not it's not always the husband, because often the husband gets so into the sport that the family get sidelined and they become all consuming. But then the other thing that interesting is back to the meaning thing. There's something you said a moment ago, Aaron, that really struck me about the fact that I think was if we live in an atheistic universe, then it's an ultimately meaningless universe. It's not possible to live that way as human beings, which is in itself fascinating. And so we do construct these little worlds of meaning. And I was reflecting on the fact I've had so many dialogues, both private and public ones, with atheists or humanists, where that's been their actually they've actually quite blatantly taken that line and gone, well, of course there's no meaning to life because there is no God, but it's okay because we can construct our own systems of meaning. And I think what I find fascinating is, of course, in one sense, I want to go, absolutely, if there is no God, that's all you're left with. Of course, the problem you run into is, well, firstly, how you convince anybody else that system of meaning. Secondly, is how you make sure you forget to remind yourself to keep forgetting that it's actually only a game and the whole life is just a game. And thirdly, is the power play, of course, because if ultimately the best you have is football, and along comes someone who doesn't care, or someone who's a rugby fan who's going to beat you up because they hate soccer players, and they're going to go, well, my system of meaning trumps yours because I'm bigger than you are. And even sport, back to will, power, and Nietzsche. And I think it just exposes for me the bleakness. I think the older I get, I am more and more struck on the absolute bleakness, actually, of atheism when you take it to its logical conclusion. That the best you can do is construct little systems of meaning. Maybe it's sport, maybe it's something else, but it is a game. And outside is the void and the howling wind, and you have to pretend it's not there and just try and distract yourself with what's in front of you. But ultimately, that too will get blown away. It makes me grateful every day for being a Christian, not in some triumphalistic I'm better than everybody else, but just having found what actually what true meaning looks like. And then, as I think Michael said, then you can put the idol back in its place, and you can be grateful for sport. You can be grateful for sex. You can be grateful for food. I can be grateful for mountain climbing, not because it's some way by which I desperately try and distract myself from the void, or somehow desperately try and fight Scrabble to put together a bit of self-esteem, but because I can be grateful to the source of all meaning, that's just one of his many, many, many gifts to us. And it's a very different approach to life.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's something reminds me of a concept I heard from a book called A Brief Theology of Sport by Lincoln Harvey, where he talks about the liturgical celebration of contingency, which sounds more of a mouthful than it actually is, I think. The liturgical celebration of contingency, and contingency in the sense that we are finite and we're bound by moments because we're not God, we're created beings. And so we're almost celebrating, rather than pretending that our life is eternal, which I think atheists, most people in the Western world today, they're so obsessed with not dying and with health. You think of the COVID situation, as an example, that's like all they've got. Like we just need to live as long as we possibly can, which of course is a good thing to do. We're clearly pro-life in that wider senses and under the smaller senses. But there's a sense in which that becomes completely ludicrous or meaningless in and of itself. And yet, so there's a good sense of us celebrating, as Christians, celebrating the fact that we are contingent beings. We're dependent upon God. We're not actually able just to live and live forever. We can't just freeze ourselves and then come back sometime in the future, however great technology is going to be. We are finite beings. We're contingent. And so even celebrating those transcendent moments within our contingent experience is a wonderful thing. But only, it's liturgical. Only we can do that in worship. I don't think an atheist can do that. They can only use it as idolatry.
I'm just looking forward to using that in conversation next time I'm chatting to a sports fans. Okay. You know why you love sports? It's because it's a liturgical celebration of our contingency.
I can see you're going to do that tonight when England are playing Scotland. You're just going to chuck that in the pub and then just be like, right, that's what
I actually think what you should do once large scale attendance in matches is allowed again as the COVID restrictions ease. Go to a football match, Michael, and rather than like the flag of the team, get yourself a big poster about existential contingency or whatever, and just wave it and see you get yourself on TV. I could just see commentators saying, some bloke down there waving a flag about.
That's it. Yeah, that's amazing. It's all sorts of, that's actually interesting. There was the John 3:16 guy, wasn't there, in America, who went around all the sporting events and sort of, try to bring that meaning into it. You could do all sorts of other interesting things. But I genuinely think, all the stuff we've been talking about today, I do think Christians could do well to be sort of empowered in their thinking and in their feeling and how they actually engage with sport, to be a little bit more thoughtful about it and to think of it liturgically, perhaps, or indeed also to think of it in the sense of needing to be ascetic and pull away from it at times, because otherwise you are just going to be immersed and going the same way as the world, which is really using sport in order to replace God, as we've been saying. So absolutely, a really good thing to do. So those of you who are listening, kind of immersed in sport, whenever you're listening to this in the future, in the present, or maybe even in the past, with a part of the past idea, I hope this has been helpful for you to sort of consider these things in a different kind of level, a theological and maybe missional level, and I hope it's provoked some thought in you, both towards the idolatry and towards the worshipful aspects that can come from us being made in the image of God and redeemed by that same God who loves us and loves the things that we do, as well as disliking the things we do which are sinful. So, that's all we have time for today on Pod of the Gaps. Myself, Aaron Edwards, from Andy Bannister, and from Michael Otts on their beloved behalf. I say goodbye to you all, and you will hear from us next time, we hope. Farewell.